Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to be talking about the OVW Netflix special called Wrestlers. It's a 7-part docu-series released on September the 13th, 2023. It documents OVW over the course of the year in 2022. In this video, we're not just going to do a blow-by-blow of the documentary. We're going to give an overview, some of the major storylines throughout the documentary, and we're going to do a little bit of a background on some of the players in the major players, the owners, basically, especially some of the new guys who are not been mentioned before. We're not going to go deeply into the history of OVW. I did a video on OVW for the WWE developmental series that I did. It's in my playlist. So if you're stumbling across this, you're a new subscriber, you haven't heard that video before, go there, and I actually go into a little bit more detail into the history of OVW. Here, I'll just give you the overview of the history. Nightmare Danny Davis, a former professional wrestler, starts OVW in about somewhere in the mid-90s, somewhere between 1994 and 1997. Danny Davis claimed that he had OVW for 5 years before they got a WWE developmental contract, which is in 1999. That would have put it at about 1994, where he formed OVW. In 1999, Jim Cornette joins the squad to get a WWE developmental contract. That ends in 2008. Cornette is ousted for slapping Santino in 05 or 06, which one that was. Al Snow was one of the head trainers of OVW, was working with Danny Davis. Danny Davis decided he wanted to retire and move to Florida. Al Snow bought the company from him in 2018. From there, Al Snow ran OVW for 3 years, paying for it pretty much out of his own pocket. And then in 2021, Matt Jones, Craig Greenberg, Dr. Jeffrey Turvin, and Andrew Jefferson formed a group to buy the majority share of OVW. And that is essentially where we sit now, as Matt Jones and Craig Greenberg are the two guys that are featured in the documentary. Now, Matt Jones formed a radio show which was called Kentucky Sports Radio. It is the largest radio show in Kentucky, focused mostly on local sports. And Craig Greenberg was in the hotel industry, was a former CEO of 21C Museum Hotels. So these guys have some money and they have some real local roots. Al Snow, of course, is a WWF wrestler, ECW wrestler. He also wrestled in TNA. Extensive wrestling history before he even joined WWE. Actually wrestled in the territories. So that's the ownership. It is a group of 5 or 6 guys, of which Al Snow is one. Matt Jones and Craig Greenberg are 2 of the others. Those are the 3 owners as they are introduced to you in this documentary. Now, the ownership of OVW has an interesting through line through this piece, as Matt Jones is sort of the face of OVW management in terms of he's overly concerned with the financials. The big angle that you learn throughout the series is that OVW is in debt and they lose money every single Thursday because they run live television every single Thursday. It's a big money loser. So Matt Jones, throughout the series, is trying to find ways to, 1, raise money, 2, cut corners. And in doing so, because he's a business-minded person, and because he's a bit of a people pleaser, and because he's still a little bit of a dickhead, he's having a difficult time relating to people around him. And they keep Al Snow on as, well, not only because he's a minority owner, but because he's sort of the liaison between the actual majority owners and the wrestlers. And that becomes a quite of a tangle throughout the series, where Matt Jones rubs the wrestlers the wrong way, and so many of them do not like him. Throughout the series, there's too many to name, really. Matt Jones rubs a wrestler the wrong way, namely in the way that he speaks to them and his approach to the business, where they approach him much like Jim Herd. If you ever watched like a WCW documentary or listen to Ric Flair or somebody talk about Jim Herd, like he's a guy who just comes into the company and starts making changes. started making demands. Matt Jones has got creative ideas where now they're doing shows that are basically charity shows for sponsors and stuff like this. Like they did the a wrestling show at what was this, an Acura car dealership, because the guy was a sponsor, so they did a show there. He's pitching ideas for these guys to wear local sports teams jerseys so they could play up the local rivalries in Kentucky, which Al Snow is against because, he wants to broaden the OVW appeal and doesn't want it tied to Kentucky too deeply. While Matt Jones, of course, is a Kentucky boy. He knows Kentucky sports. He knows the local audience. He feels like this would draw local viewers, considering they're based in Kentucky. He has a very good point. If you don't have your local support, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter if me in Detroit don't understand the rivalry of Kentucky sports. I'm not going to an OVW show because it's in Kentucky, right? So he's like, well, if we're going to sell tickets in Kentucky, we should be more rooted in Kentucky culture. And so you start having the OVW guys wrestling at festivals and different things like this. This is all Matt Jones' idea of trying to get the wrestling in front of people who may like it and who may like the company because it has a local flavor and all of the talent are local, etc. But he's not very well liked because of his attitude. He's hyper focused on money. He's coming in. He's kind of threatening people who've been there for a while. I think one of the commentators is in charge of marketing. It's a small company here. And he's basically threatening to fire the guy if the building isn't full for the big one, which was, I guess, a pay-per-view event. And Matt Jones basically threatened to fire the guy, And a lot of the talent don't like Matt. And they don't want to deal with Matt. One of the issues is that Matt has epilepsy. So he had a seizure. He was in the hospital for a while. And he was talking to one of the wrestlers named Amon or whatever. I forget what his real name is. It doesn't matter. And this Amon guy is like a social worker or something like that. So they got both sides of the conversation, in which Amon says that he mentioned to Matt that, hey, I heard that you was in the hospital for a while. If you are feeling stressed out, I have, hopefully you can get some help, or, hopefully we can help you, or I have resources in which, I can reach out and get you some help or whatever. Matt Jones took that as this guy was saying, about my medical condition, that he sees why I have this medical condition. He felt very disrespected and said that, he would have fired the guy, but he wants to respect Al's decision to not fire him, but he doesn't ever want to talk to this guy again. And you really don't see Amon that much anymore after this spot. But it's one of those kinds of deals where, Matt calls a talent to come to a church function that they're having, where I think they're wrestling at this church function. Reverend Ronnie is, he's a guy, he plays a wrestling Baptist preacher kind of character that some people may feel is sacrilegious. But apparently he had done something on a show that the church felt was disrespectful towards other men of the cloth, and they asked that Reverend Ronnie not be participating in the OVW show that is going to be held at their church. Well, Matt Jones had the guy show up anyway and then refused to pay him, because he's saying like, hey, I didn't tell you to come here. But the guy's like, but I drove here anyway. You could pay me anyway. And Matt's like, nah, kind of like, no. And it makes sense both ways, like you didn't tell me not to come, but you also, let me here to show up. I mean, you could at least pay my, the cost of the gas for me to get here or whatever. It's okay that if he doesn't wrestle, but you wasted his time. There's a lot of little debates like that's going on about talent not being paid on time. Matt Jones is hyper focused on money. He says that the company was $180,000 in debt. and they were losing money essentially every week. And he set this date, which was August the 27th. If that big show did not work, they were going to close OVW. They were going to have to shutter it, or they were going to have to sell their stake of whatever he planned to do at that point in time. So Matt Jones is a pretty important piece of this series. And I saw a lot of people were attacking him. A lot of people who are inside of the wrestling business, like the Vince Russos and people like that are like, who the hell is this guy? He just comes in and he starts trying to make changes and he's telling people what to do. I was looking at it again from a different perspective. Yes, Matt Jones is a wrestling fan and he comes in like a lot of us. He has his own ideas, but he's, at the end of the day, an investor. And he's trying to broaden the appeal, or at least deepen the roots of OVW in Kentucky, while also branching out. There's a positive and a negative to that. The positive is, again, if you don't have the people who are living in the general area where you operate, if those people are not coming to your shows, which they weren't, by the way, he's complaining essentially every week that the building was not full, there was not enough people, they were losing money, they were not selling enough tickets, their ad sales in terms of television were absolute trash, they had no sponsors, they didn't have anything. And so everything he was trying to do wasn't about, hey, I know better than Al. It was, how could this idea support what Al is doing? And people were being very resistant to what Matt Jones wanted to do. And a lot of it was because he was an outsider, not because what he was saying was wrong, And I definitely felt bad for him because he wasn't saying anything wrong. It's not like he came up with some silly gimmick that was going to destroy the business or anything like that. No, guys don't want to wrestle at county fairs. No, guys don't want to wrestle in churches. They don't want to have to wrestle in open fields or whatever because Matt Jones thinks it's a good idea. But at the same time, though, if it means somebody is willing to give money to OVW later down the line or sponsor the show or whatever, it's an investment in the future. It's an investment in the culture. He was trying to help. I also like the storyline throughout the show where Matt was trying to gain Al Snow's respect. I think there was an entire little, section there about Matt Jones being a guy who never knew his birth father and kind of started seeing Al Snow as a father figure. And he's a people pleaser. This Matt Jones is, and he was trying to get Al Snow to give him a good old attaboy. Al Snow was positioned as if he's like Hank Hill or something like that. This perpetually stuck in the past kind of guy that was kind of resistant to Matt Jones's ideas, not because he didn't like Matt, but he felt that his version of wrestling was more pure and more old school. And we do this. This is our style of things. And Matt Jones is more, and I love this dichotomy too, where Matt Jones watches everything. He's a guy who watches wrestling. He watches Raw. He watches SmackDown. He was even at one point talking about watching some small time pro wrestling show and was like studying what they did and how, OVW could adopt some of the things that they did. Like, I think he was talking about some company named Coast to Coast, which I had never heard of. And he said, like, our product is better than theirs, but they did 5,000 pay-per-view buys. Why can't we do that? What's missing? And he started talking about marketing again. Like, the difference is marketing. How do we market to a larger audience? How do we get 5,000 people to buy a pay-per-view? And it was very interesting too, because there was one pay-per-view event, I forget which one it was, where they only needed 500 buys to turn a profit. They got 74. It was pathetic. And at some point you have to start feeling for Matt Jones. You're like, man, the guy's got a point. The buildings are half empty. You're not selling any pay-per-views. You don't have any sponsors. He's funding this ordeal. What more can you do? And ultimately, he ended up coming up with a solid idea, which was to get Al Snow back in the ring. Al Snow was very resistant to this because he's 59 years old. He just had knee surgeries. He had 2 double knee surgeries or whatever, knee replacements, I should say. And he had not wrestled. And, he was sort of really resistant to wrestling. Like, he wasn't actively resistant, saying he wasn't going to do it. He just kept telling Matt Jones he'll think about it, but hoping that Matt would forget about it. But Matt just kept poking and prodding and, all this stuff. And it was very fun. And of course, Al Snow ended up doing it because it was for the good of the business. So he ended up doing it. But I see that Matt Jones came out of this thing as being sort of a villain for a lot of people. But I understood his role. Now, one of the unanswered questions that you get in the episode is, did OVW actually ever make any money? At the end of the thing, I was questioning whether they made any money or not. Now, apparently there was an interview that was done by Matt Jones and Al Snow, who did an interview for a place called Hidden Remote. And Matt Jones said, quote, they made it through. So basically, they made it through the summer. And they made enough money to continue, but they have not made enough. They're essentially in the same position in 2023 that they were in 2022. Now, I also had a lot of respect for Matt Jones because he is the reason that the Netflix show is even happening. So Matt Jones, in the interview with Hidden Remote, he says that he was watching Last Chance U, which is a television show. And he said, how about Last Chance U, but wrestling? And came up with this idea and then pitched it to Craig Greenberg, who is, of course, one of the co-owners of OVW. Craig Greenberg knew one of the guys at BBC America. He also knew Greg Whiteley, who ends up being the director of the Netflix series. And Craig Greenberg made it happen. So it was Matt Jones's idea for them to even have a Netflix show. So while everybody is kind of dogging Matt Jones, not only is he not wrong in terms of business needs to turn around because it is a business, but he's the reason why people are even paying attention to OVW right now and watching this documentary. So I got to give Matt Jones a lot of credit. I thought he was really good here. I don't think he was a bad guy as much as sometimes they tried to make him look like a bad guy. But I really liked what he was bringing. You could see how he made great on people, but I also liked what he brought to the show. Specifically, his idea of not running live every week. He said that idea, and it was like a light bulb should have gone off above the heads of everybody. That OVW does not need to be live every week. Now, the only reason that it is live every week is because Al Snow wants it that way. That's how Al Snow has been running the company. He's been running it as a live event every single week on the local televisions, but it doesn't work. Financially, it's not a good idea. While traditional wrestling used to be you tape once a month, 4 episodes or whatever, and then you have time to focus on something else, and then you come back the next month, tape another bunch of episodes, etc. That seemed to be a better way of doing business. And if I was the owner of OVW, I would have done that too. Like, I didn't see anything that wasn't sensible about that. It came across like Al Snow knew everything about wrestling. He knew shit about business. While Matt Jones knew a lot about business, not as much about the social element of wrestling. He knew how to make he knew about the marketing, and he was a fan of the business and that kind of stuff, even though the wrestlers didn't really want him around. But he knew something. He wasn't a complete and total knob like some of the people who ran WCW. Like some of the people who get into wrestling not knowing anything about wrestling, he wasn't that vapid. He knew something. He knew stuff. But even if it wasn't perfect, it was something. And he wanted OVW to be something that he could talk about on the radio that wasn't just him plugging his own products. That's why he wanted the sports teams element to it, so that he could rope OVW naturally into his radio show. And he's got the largest radio network in Kentucky. Then that's a lot of people listening to his show. How can we naturally get them in the conversation? And that's what he was trying to do with the whole Kentucky college football rivalry, I think it was, that he was trying to do. It sounded silly on its face, but when you actually think about hey, you tape and you record your show in Kentucky, it would make sense for it to be Grassley rooted in Kentucky, you know? So I get that. I actually liked Matt Jones in this episode, in this series. Al Snow is a very, very, very important part of this show too. Obviously, he's the head trainer. He's a minority owner, and he is the direct opposite of Matt Jones. Al Snow is the guy who handles a lot of the problems that pops up with the talent. And through Al Snow, you learn how difficult it is to run a wrestling promotion, how difficult it is to write a television show, how difficult it is to deal with talent. And Al Snow was fascinating to follow in this series. For starters, dealing with talent. You know, with Matt Jones gets into it with a talent. How does, Al Snow handle that? One of the interesting elements of the show was Al Snow talking about bringing in an outside talent. This ended up being James Storm. This became one of the memes from the episode where he had built up Al Snow, he's in charge of creative. He's built up Mahabali Shera as being an unstoppable beast, and he needs somebody to work with Shera. And so his idea was, okay, I'll bring in James Storm. So he pitches James Storm to Matt Jones, and Matt Jones says, well, James Storm's cost $600 and it won't sell 60 tickets. This led to a lot of people really kind of adding James Storm and trying to get his opinion on what Matt Jones said. And I agree that Matt Jones should not have said that. I know that a lot of people are going to be watching this, not sure who James Storm is, even though James Storm was on TV for over 10 years when it comes to TNA. TNA never really broke through. This is waking up to a batch of new audiences who are now just looking at him kind of like he's nothing. And the way Al handled that in terms of, kind of not playing into Matt Jones's negativity and still trying to explain to him the creative idea of it, of, hey, we need somebody who the audience thinks is credible, who the audience believes in, who could beat Shera believably, and then for Shera to work with in the future without acknowledging Matt Jones's negativity, was a good masterclass on how to deal between talent and management. Because he could have just defended, James Storm and pissed off Matt Jones, and then the thing probably wouldn't have happened. But by him being able to approach it a little bit more professionally and trying to get Matt to understand this is how we draw money in wrestling. Sometimes you bring in somebody from the outside and they helped you build your star from the inside. That, I think, was it was a very good element of the show. Now, because James Storm was added a lot, I do have his response that he had on Twitter. So James Storm said, quote, well, as wrestlers and fans know, not many shows run on a Thursday. Al called and asked me if I would help out and help some of the talent. Travel and hotel paid, plus filming Netflix, and only 2.5 hours from my house. Not bad. Plus, I don't really need the money, but if you can make a little, get in some reps, help people, and get an actor's credit that I got, win-win. I got to help and work with some good friends. Now, the other guy doesn't know a wristwatch from a wrist lock. Which is pretty clear, but this is one of the reasons why Matt Jones came out of this thing as a heel, because he's talking negatively about talent behind closed doors, and this stuff is being recorded and he knows it, but he's talking negatively about talent behind closed doors, and that will be problematic, especially if that stuff leaks out into the locker room. Another thing that was a nice little schism between Al Snow and Matt Jones that I liked see grow is Matt Jones wanted to have a relationship with AEW. Matt Jones pitched this idea to Al Snow saying, hey, I talked to Tony Khan. They're going to be taping near here. I want some OVW talent to go and work AEW Dark. Hopefully they can be seen in front of people and they'll be able to draw when they come back. Absolutely sensible idea from Matt Jones here. Nothing too offensive about it. Just wants the talent to go and be seen. Al Snow says, well, it doesn't do us any good. It's a one-sided relationship. And, our guys are just going to go up there and lose and look bad. And Matt Jones is like, I want to have any kind of relationship with AEW. And then Al Snow kind of tries to explain it. He explains it more to us, the viewers, than he explains it to Matt, where he's saying, you want to build your company where these big companies come to you. And if they come to you, then you get more favorable terms. If you go to them, then everything is in their favor. And I get that. I understand that. But OVW is broke. They can't pay the talent. They have no sponsors. They have no ad revenue. They have nothing. Matt Jones, again, is right. Like, get the talent in front of people. I understand that Al Snow has this old school idea that you don't send your talent out to be jobbers on television and then expect them to draw any money in your territory. I get that. But that's a very 80s way of thinking. I don't think that people believe that now, But Al Snow went along with it anyway. And Al Snow was involved with picking the talent that he thought would best represent OVW. And he picked, I think, about 5 or 6 talent. This becomes a bigger deal later because the girl that they try to pitch as pretty much the star of OVW, Hollywood Haley J, was not one of the people that was picked. So when we talk about her, we're going to go into that a little bit more. But Al Snow pitches the idea for various talents to go work in AEW. He ends up losing Layla Gray, who ends up getting signed, and he was happy for her and all this kind of stuff. But you see that Al is very protective of his talent because if you watch the show, Hollywood Haley J was trying to branch out. Once she wasn't picked to do the AEW thing, she figured, okay, they're trying to stunt my growth here in OVW. So she started doing WOW. And you started seeing over time how Al is going to deal with her doing her own thing while also being a part of OVW, and how to book around people who are constantly changing their schedules and have bad attitudes and big egos, etc., which of course she does. So that was very enlightening too. That was really good stuff for me as somebody who's watching the product. Also, going back to the Mahabali Shera James Storm thing, he had to inform Mahabali Shera, we're going to have you lose to James Storm. And he starts to explain to the audience the boo-boo job face, where when you tell a wrestler that he's not going over, the reaction that they give you. And he said, okay, Shera essentially gave him the boo-boo face. But, he explained to him, this is going to be a long-term thing. This is not, any way indicative how we feel about you. This is how we are planning to draw money and do business in the future. And trying to get Shera to understand that. So that was also very good. Also, another pretty good thing when it comes to booking is he had built this entire story around Mahabali Shera, only for Shera to get injured in the match with James Storm. So now he's throwing his hands in the air. What do we do? Shera was our guy. We booked all of this stuff around Shera, and then Shera went and separated his shoulder. Now, Al Snow is stressed, because Matt Jones is constantly talking about, hey, we need to draw huge money for this big show. Al's big angle for the show is Mahabali Shera versus James Storm. Then Shera is out, so now he's got to come up with something else. Hollywood Haley J, who is one of the stars of the show, he doesn't know whether she's going to be there or not because she's leaving for days at a time to do WOW, and he's not sure whether she's going to be there. Other talents are having other issues, and that's something that you can watch Al work through, and that was engaging stuff. Also very engaging is watching Al deal with a wrestler being arrested. So this is about a wrestler named Jake Lawless who worked in OVW. Jake Lawless had a really sad story that his wife was once pregnant with twins and one of the twins died. Jake went into a bit of a depression, started doing drugs, and he ended up getting busted snorting some stuff. And essentially it was left up to Al to deal with it. Matt Jones and all these guys didn't really want to deal with it. They didn't want the guy there because a wrestler from OVW getting arrested, was on the local media And Matt Jones felt that it had affected one of the sponsorship deals that he was coming up with. And that, one of the places heard that a wrestler was arrested for drugs, and it gave the company a bad reputation. But Al is a former wrestler. He understands the struggle of wrestlers, and he explains all of this. And he sits down with the guy in the later episodes and explains to him, hey, what was the outcome? The guy explains that he's only got a probation and all this kind of stuff. Basically it wasn't he was going to jail or anything. So Al Snow explains it to him like, in the old days, I wouldn't have brought you back, but it's not the old days anymore. Understands that, Jake was going through a tough time and wants him to give him the opportunity to work his way back. Then you learn that, he goes in the back and starts smoking weed with with Haley J and her boyfriend. So he was what they call California sober. I mean, he wouldn't stop doing drugs, and that's I know people are really coming like, it's just weed. It's like, it just shows a lack of respect that you went to Al Snow hat in hand saying, oh, I'm going to clean my act up. And then you immediately went backstage and started smoking weed. It's like, it was very weird. Like, he wasn't taking it seriously. But it was interesting watching Al Snow deal with that nonetheless. So that was very good. And watching Al Snow deal with all of these different things that a booker and head of creative would have to deal with. Attitudes, injuries, talent not showing up, talent getting arrested. All of this stuff made it feel more real. It had a more realistic feel to it because Al has to constantly adjust. What probably my favorite part of this is Al sitting down, listening to the wrestlers pitch ideas. And it's absolutely hilarious how bad some wrestlers are at creative, especially their own creative. And how so many of them don't understand what they're supposed to be doing or who they are as characters. There's a guy named Eric Darkstorm. He's pretty important to the Haley J section of this thing, who couldn't explain to anybody what his character was. And Al, has famously, he's supposed to be able to, explain your character in 5, words or whatever. And despite the fact that you could really explain Eric Darkstorm in 1 word, which is mercenary, he couldn't really explain what his character was. And he's in Al Snow's office pitching ridiculous ideas. It's hilarious. Shira is in Al Snow's office pitching ideas and they're dumb. Al Snow is dealing with Amazing Maria, who is Haley J's mom, pitching a death match. And Al Snow hates death matches. So that was an interesting thing to watch. Also interesting that Brett Lauderdale, the CEO of Game Changer Wrestling, actually took Al Snow's hatred of death matches personally for some reason, and it started tweeting about how OVW loses money on Twitter. It's like, really? Who cares if he doesn't like death matches? I mean, he worked in ECW. You guys are ECW LARPers. Come on. Not just that, however, but Al Snow is a guy who they went through his list of injuries, his neck surgeries, knee surgeries, shoulders, etc. And he didn't wrestle that many death matches, if any at all. He just wrestled regular matches that was very aggressive, and he did high-flying moves like moonsaults and different things like that, and took a lot of bumps. He's talking about a guy who artistically approached wrestling in terms of wanting to have the best match possible, wanting to be skilled and talented, which doesn't take place really in a deathmatch context. And it was very interesting to have Brett Lauderdale getting his feelings about it, because as far as I know, Brett Lauderdale's never wrestled. He's always been the guy kind of funding and promoting wrestling. So you got Al Snow who's doing what Brett Lauderdale can do, but Brett Lauderdale can't do what Al Snow can do or has done. So he's talking about it from the perspective of, not only is it bad entertainment in terms of hitting people with, all these crazy weapons, but it's also terrible for the talent in terms of they don't learn how to work, and they don't actually show off their skills and talent in death matches. So I get it. I'm actually on Team Al Snow. I hate death matches. It's fun sometimes. You can create a scenario in which a death match might be a good idea, But generally speaking, I'm on Team Al Snow. Fuck a death match. Who really cares? Um, so Al Snow is a gem throughout this thing. And him being stressed out, it seems like every other scene is Al Snow bitching about the production quality, which is hilarious because the monitors in the back keep going out in gorilla position. They lost a turnbuckle pad that they couldn't replace because the company is so broke that they can't replace a turnbuckle, a turnbuckle pad. It was absolutely hilarious. So Al Snow was a gem through this thing. He carries me through it. It was very good. Sort of as the main wrestler on the show is Hollywood Haley J. She is a young female wrestler in OVW. I had seen her when I used to watch OVW. I've seen her, a lot of her. She was, pretty well featured. And here she's one of the stars of the show. If there's 4 or 5 stars of the show, she's probably number 2 behind Al. There's a lot of Hollywood Haley J in this documentary because she has such an interesting story. She was 22 at the filming of the show. I think she's probably 23 now. She's got a child who's 4 years old. So I think she had a baby at 18. Her mom was 16 when she was born. Her mom had went to jail for selling drugs. So Haley J was in very bad situations. She had gotten raped when she was 15. She had this really terrible lifestyle where she grew up to be this very young, petite, white hood rat. And that's who she is. And pretty much you watch her try to destroy her own career throughout this entire documentary. Not only for having a massive ego, because she knows how, people are perceiving her to be the star of the show, but she's also the person that Al Snow listens to the most in terms of when it comes to wrestlers having ideas for their own creative. It was Haley J's ideas that he actually listened to the most because she seemed to have a more sensible head for business, even more so than her mom. Now, her mom was the amazing Maria, who apparently works in a hotel or something like that. All of them do. They all have second jobs. Well, first jobs. OVW is more of a second job. And a lot of Haley J's story is tension with her and her mom, trying to work out their past relationship. In terms of her mom being in jail for a long time. And then when her mom got out of jail, her mom was never around because her mom was either out wrestling, because her mom was a wrestler, or her mom was out working, doing something else. So she felt like she raised herself. And so she has very little respect for her mom. She also has a pent-up resentment towards her mom. She has a pent-up resentment towards, men, and she's very aggressive and this kind of stuff too, which leads to her relationship with this guy named Eric Darkstorm. Darkstorm is 36, has been in the business for a long time. Apparently he worked in TNA. I've never seen this guy before in my life, but apparently this dude worked in TNA. And he's one of those grizzled old vets, the stereotypical grizzled old vets. Oh, I don't like women's wrestling. They don't know shit about wrestling. Nobody knows shit about wrestling except guys like me. He's got a super ego too. He's white trash. She's white trash. And they basically show you a white trash love story on this goddamn documentary. Now, Haley's mom is named Maria. And Maria was a deathmatch wrestler. And she went to jail for selling drugs when Haley was 7 years old. So I don't know how long she spent in jail. I wasn't sure. But when she got out, she got into wrestling. And then she was doing death matches for a short time. So she worked for Ian Rotten at IWA because they showed clips in here. And so when they started doing the feud between Haley J and her mom, which was an interesting storyline throughout the show, is how they could work on their relationship by feuding with each other. And it was very good that the idea is that Maria wanted to pitch that the feud ended a death match, that they would have, barbed wire and, or she was pitching various ideas and Al Snow was saying no, how about barbed wire? No, she only wanted one pane of glass. Al was like, absolutely not. We're not doing glass. No glass ever. So he ended up letting them do bats covered in thumbtacks, garbage cans, a garbage can lid, chairs. But he basically gave the thumbs up or the thumbs down on every single item that they were supposed to do in this match. And and ended up becoming what they wanted it to be. But it was not nearly what Maria wanted it to be in terms of how crazy she wanted to go with the match. And I really like this element, not only because it tied together and ended the resentment portion of Haley J and Maria's relationship. Like, once you see that they had the match, they worked together, they trusted each other, you see their relationship grow from there. Because then they start going to WoW from there. But you actually see that they took care of one another. And at one point, Haley J says, if I'm going to bleed, I want my mama to do it. You know, because I'm scared of, she was scared of doing the blade or whatever. So she wanted her mom to blade her. She didn't bleed in the match anyway, but she was saying if she had to bleed, she wanted her mom to do it. The way they structured the match, the mom didn't really do much in terms of damage to Haley J anyway. She basically just absorbed a lot of damage. Because it was a I won't fight my own child type of story. So it was that ordeal. They very smartly uploaded a lot of the matches that were featured in the documentary on the OVW website. So if you watched the documentary series and you're like, oh, I want to watch that match, they have uploaded it to the site. So Shira versus James Storm, they uploaded it. Haley J versus her mom, they uploaded it. So they're very smart. They're getting their marketing in now. It's very intelligent of them. It took them long enough. Anyway, so that's basically Haley J's story, that she's this angry hood rat who is, doesn't know how to turn her character off. She gets into an argument with Eric because he wants to have conversations with the real her. And Haley J is saying, hey, I am who I am, just with the volume turned up a little bit. I'm the same person. And he thinks that it's all a facade. She's trying to protect herself because, she's got this tough exterior and he doesn't want to deal with this character anymore. And then I think in episode 6, shit gets kind of real, because this is where the domestic violence element comes in, because it's either 6 or 7, the episode where you find out that Eric and Haley got into a fight, where he was getting jealous that Haley was becoming a bigger star. He is against women's wrestling in general, but for some reason he's very jealous of his own girlfriend. She's going out to California, getting on WoW, which is Maria's idea. Maria took her daughter out there. And they become, what was this, Big Truck Betty or whatever the hell they were doing out there. And Eric Darkstorm, throughout this entire time, is talking about how WoW sucks. It's nothing but a bunch of actresses, and they don't really know how to wrestle. They practice their matches, for 10 days before they have a match and all this kind of stuff. He's just really running down WoW, and he just being very negative. So when she comes back, she doesn't really want to hear that shit, because for her, it's an opportunity to go forward in her career. And he's jealous, there's no other word to put it. And he's very controlling. He, like Al Snow, don't want her to outgrow OVW. And that becomes one of the things too. Now, Al is a little bit different. Now, we remind you, Al Snow had to pick some talent to go to AEW. He didn't pick Haley J, despite the fact that she might be, and in terms of management, like Matt Jones is a really huge fan of Haley J, is the best on their roster. He didn't pick her because she's got an attitude, and also because she doesn't know how to follow the rules. One of the rules was that Al Snow does not care what you do on your personal time, quote unquote, your personal time. But so Haley J got caught smoking weed behind the building, and it's really not that big of a deal. But because she got caught smoking weed, which is in violation of the rules because she wasn't supposed to smoke, earlier in the show, you see that Haley J was talking about how she smoked weed in the car, and then she would get nervous before matches, and then she would smoke weed after the match. So Al Snow had to tell her, it's unsafe for you to wrestle under the influence. You can't do that stuff around here. So then she decided, okay, I'm going to skirt the rules a little bit by smoking backstage, and then she got busted and got snitched on. So then Al starts doing this big thing. It's kind of a blind item where he's talking about doing things on your own time. And, she knows that he's talking about her, but he never approaches her with it. And so she gets an attitude, which, women do. And all of a sudden, once she gets skipped over for the AEW thing, she starts looking for a way to get out of OVW. This, of course, the WoW thing opens up for her because her mom is a wrestler who sees this opportunity to go work for Jeannie Buss. at Women of Wrestling and do this tow truck gimmick or whatever she had come up with. And as a sign of goodwill, she took Haley J with her. Unfortunately, they were feuding on television, OVW television, while they left to go film for WOW. So Al has to book their storyline without either one of them being there, and keep their storyline relevant without either one of them being there. This is where, taping your show is probably the smartest idea. So if your talent decides to go and do something else, you don't have to rewrite your show around them. Anyway, you see that Haley J sees this as the growth of her career. She's only 22. She's on television in Kentucky and surrounding areas. And now she's going to be on national television through WOW. And she looks at it and says, okay, I'm growing. I'm getting bigger, yada, yada, yada. And it's going to her head a little bit. And that's kind of getting on Eric's nerves. She's got a little bit of an ego. So in episode 6 or 7, I'll forget which one, you hear that they got into a fight. And Reverend Ronnie, who we learn is Haley J's best friend and her trainer. She doesn't really train with the rest of the talent in OVW. She trains with Reverend Ronnie because she trusts him. And so Reverend Ronnie gets us into a fight with Eric Darkstorm because he put his hands on Haley J. And he didn't hit her as much as he grabbed her by the hair as she was trying to leave him. He said that he reached into her car and grabbed her by the hair or something like that. Reverend Ronnie saw this, jumped in, got involved. There was a scuffle. And then we get into the conversation about domestic violence, where Haley J starts explaining how she's a psycho. She's said this a couple of times, that she, basically is a psycho who ruins her own life. And she has punched him in the face numerous times. She's hit him, she's cussed him, and all this sort of stuff. And then she's asked if Eric had ever hit her. And she said, no comment. That was her response, no comment. And then she said, certainly not the ways that I've hit him. I've certainly done worse than he has. So, that's not no. That is not no. And I can tell you this, it didn't turn out very well. This is ridiculous. I don't know if calling your boyfriend a domestic abuser, even though you didn't say those words. You didn't say that it didn't happen, but I guess she's trying to be honest. Maybe he grabbed her, pushed her, or something like that. But she's saying like he didn't haul off and punch me in the face or anything. But she's a very young woman with a child. This is a very dangerous scenario. He's a significantly older man. He's 14 years older than she is. He's a little bit controlling and a little bit jealous. It has all the ingredients of domestic violence. Significantly older man, jealous of the young girl, think that she's out doing whatever it is she wants because she's going to California for 10 days at a time or whatever. He's very controlling, very jealous, and he's aggressive. He smokes weed, he drinks, he's a redneck. He's got interesting situation that they showed all his tattoos. He's got Ron Paul, Jesus, and some band named Five Finger Death Punch all tattooed all over his body. So he's a real piece of work, this Eric Darkstorm guy. But he's not shown to be like the worst guy in the world, but you can tell that of all of the male characters, he was positioned to probably come out the worst in this whole thing. Not only because of the domestic violence stuff, but he comes across as a bit of a misogynist, a bit of a bad influence, but they love each other, the two of them, and it is what it is. I'm not one to judge people's relationships, but you can see that it's a toxic relationship that is not going anywhere. And that if she's going to become anything in the wrestling business, the first thing she's got to do is get away from that fucking guy. But you can see that's because she's probably one of the youngest people in the locker room. Everybody has a sort of protective relationship over her. And she wants to break free and be a rebel. She wants to do her own thing. And that's an interesting through line for the story too, because, she talks extensively about wanting to go to WWE, to her, that's success. Going to get signed to WWE is a success. Not getting out of OVW and leaving Kentucky is a success. She successfully got away from her original hometown, which I don't remember what it was, but she left that town to move to Louisville, where she ends up working for OVW, and she was very glad to be out of that town. And she talked about how she was almost robbed in that town, how she was raped in that town. She had to get out of there. And so she looks at California and wow, the same way that she looked at her hometown. There's a lot of issues with OVW, the Eric Darkstorm thing, Al Snow being protective and judgmental, if we're being honest. And she's looking for a way out. And WoW is one of her ways out. Al Snow, to his credit, he doesn't see WoW as being an upgrade from OVW. He says it's a lateral move. It's not quite lateral because WoW is national. No, it doesn't showcase Haley J as a talent. He has a point when it comes to that. The character that she has in OVW is basically herself. Young hood rat, bad baby, catch me outside kind of whole ordeal. In OVW, in WoW, she's an actress. She's playing a tow truck driver or some nonsense like that who happens to wrestle on the side or something. So it's probably better for her if she wants to be herself, to be Hollywood Haley J in OVW. But if she wants to take on different roles and try different things, then WoW is great. I think Al Snow, if he were to drop the whole everything needs to be live every Thursday, he probably would get behind her moving on a little bit more, because he could then schedule when she's not there, as opposed to you stressing about whether she's going to show up or not. But you get a lot from Hollywood Haley J because she's in this thing a lot. She's in this thing a lot. So she's really good. Her mom is really good too. You get to learn how her mom's, failures, that, she was married to Haley J's dad and then they got a divorce. She was trying to figure out how she was going to take care of these kids by herself. She started selling drugs, got arrested. She wasn't much of a mother to Haley J. So she tries to, mother her, but she also mothers the entire roster. And that also is a source of resentment between her and Haley J, as, I think a young lady gets injured in a match and Maria is there trying to, teaching her how to breathe and how not to, panic and freak out and all this stuff. And Haley J is, having an attitude about it like, oh, she's everybody's mom except mine, that kind of thing, and you get that and you see that and it's very visceral, So that means a lot. That's really the beating heart of this thing. It's the Hollywood Haley J, Eric Darkstorm, Maria situation here. That's really, you could have done a docu-series on just them, their relationship. You could have done a docu-series on just them, alone, and it probably would have been very good. You got spots of other people, like they talked about Cash Flow and Shira, and Shira was another interesting one, even though he becomes prominent a little bit later in the series, that, he was a celebrity in India because he was on Ring Ka King, which is an Indian wrestling show that was, I think, an offshoot of TNA, I guess you want to call it. And he was also signed to WWE for a short time. He was suicidal after he got released from WWE. He was only there for 8 months. And then he called Al Snow and started rebuilding himself in OVW. They didn't mention that he went back to, or occasionally goes back to Impact every now and again. That stuff wasn't mentioned. But it was shown that Shira was the guy who had made it to the big time and been pushed back down, And that comes into sort of the end. At the end of the series, there's sort of a prologue that is called What is Success, essentially. And the marketing guy says, well, if you count success as, big numbers on your check and going to WWE or AEW or whatever, what's success after you do that? It's like, well, more money, bigger platforms, more, infinite growth, which is not what capitalism is about, but that's what individuals think that it's about. And that's what they essentially want for themselves, is how much of a star can I be? How much money can I make? How many more opportunities can I take advantage of? What can I do? You know, people are always seeking for more. You should never really settle. But that becomes sort of the question: is what is success? And it's basically aimed at the Hollywood Haley J angle and juxtapose her from Mahabali Shira. She's never been anywhere. She's a young girl. She seeks to go to WWE. While Mahabali Shira has been there, he was there for 8 months, you know, never made television. And then I don't think he'd even made NXT and then got sent away. But even though he does want to go back, or he wants to go to AEW, everybody does essentially on that roster. And you see also when it comes to Cash Flow, who is a longtime veteran, you know, who was so proud of working dark matches for AEW, even though he didn't get to do much of anything, that he showed his dad. You know, he was so proud of being a jobber on AEW Dark that he showed it to his dad. And I was touched by that, if we're being honest, considering how old that guy was, and he's been in the business for such a long time. For the highlight of his career to come in 2022 to be a job guy on AEW Dark, it really shows you that, yeah, wrestlers, some of them, it don't quite work out for them. You know, some of them end up like Roman Reigns. A lot of them end up like Cash Flow. So it's a really good documentary series. I don't want to talk about it too much longer. I do want to say this. For the first couple of episodes, maybe the first 2 or 3, David Shoemaker is the wrestling historian of choice. And I have to say, he is such a wrestling historian for normies. Of all the people you could choose to do the history portion of your wrestling documentary, for you to choose David Shoemaker is absolutely hilarious. It's hilarious that he is the guy that does that does the historian. And this is why it's so funny. So in episode 1, he's in it and he gives the history of pro wrestling. That and he says the goal of pro wrestling isn't to initiate a real fight. It's to entertain, to make people feel. And I said, I shook my head and I really didn't want to finish it after that. I was hoping he wasn't going to be in it much more. Yes, the goal of wrestling is to imitate a real fight and make it entertaining. That's the point. Shoemaker. I don't know who told you it wasn't. You're like, but it is, the goal is to make it look real and entertain people. You know, make it look legit. Like, that's the point. They don't really want to hurt each other. They want to entertain, and you entertain by putting on a realistic looking match. And then he starts talking about it being the most basic sport since the beginning of time, which of course is true. He talks about the Goldust Trio. He doesn't name them, but he said he's the one who started fixing matches. Okay, that's true. He talks about wrestling being a morality tale, has a reflection of society and wish fulfillments. Okay, that's also true. Then he says there's AEW, WWE, and then the loosely defined third tier, the remnants of regional wrestling, of which OVW is placed. And this is where I think they kind of miss, they whiff when it comes to OVW, is that we're not sure. If you had never heard of OVW before, you're not sure if OVW is an independent wrestling company or whether it's a school. Because early, they show you that Al Snow is the head trainer and he's training these talents. He's teaching them how to do stuff outside the ring. He's teaching them how to do stuff in the ring. And then it goes beyond that to, it's basically just an independent wrestling show. And you're saying to yourself, okay, yes, it can be both. It can have elements of both. But I would not put OVW on the quote-unquote loosely defined third tier. Because I would think Impact would be the loosely defined third tier. You know? David Shoemaker in the next episode talks about the importance of wrestling in TV, which I had no problem with. Yes, wrestling pretty much coincides with the upswing in television. And that's pretty much the last time you see him in here. He's not in here a lot. But his idea that the point of wrestling is to entertain is like, okay, so why don't they just juggle? You know, why don't they swallow swords or whatever? I mean, come on, Shoemaker, smarten up. And I was wondering, why they choose him of all people. Also, another problem I think here is Nightmare Danny Davis. I remember Jim Cornette saying that he recorded a lot with this team. He's in the first episode, and only in that episode for about 15 seconds, as he explains that every other WWE developmental territory, once WWE pulled funding, went out of business, except OVW. That's essentially all Nightmare Danny Davis adds to this show, is how OVW survived when everybody else failed. That's pretty much, and not even how, is that it did. Like, we still here, even though WWE pulled funding, 15 years ago, while, Deep South closed, FCW closed, everybody else closed. Okay, that's a good point, but I would have liked for Nightmare Danny Davis to be a part of the show. Like, I know he's not a part of the program anymore, but to be there to give background, like how he chose Al Snow to be one of the head trainers when he was there for OVW. That kind of thing, to give some color to why it's in Louisville. Why did he put it in this particular place? Give some color on the background. Like the entire show is predicated upon, this is where Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, John Cena, Batista, where these guys came from. And you don't hear anything about those guys. Not really. It would have been nice if Danny Davis could have talked a little bit about it, or whatever, but we didn't get a lot of history on OVW here. Otherwise, it's a really good series. I highly suggest it. If you're a wrestling fan, I highly suggest it. If you are trying to figure out the history of OVW, probably not. This is made for normies, as they do go about explaining baby faces and heels, what going over means, what a pop is, even though Al Snow says it's short for popping your nut, which I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. I've never heard that before in my life until Al Snow said it, but hey, I don't know. But they explain a lot of the terms and different things like that, because this show is made for normies. It's not made for hardcore wrestling fans. But it's still, as a wrestling fan, you will get something out of it. Yes, there is some ridiculousness in it if you can look past that stuff. Like maybe guys saying that Al Snow is a legend and he's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and all these kind of things, where these guys, as far as I'm concerned, they're Al Snow's students. They look up to Al Snow. They admire him personally. Of course, they would think Al Snow is one of the best of all time. If somebody who doesn't, if you're a normie, you probably don't even know who Al Snow is. So you can't combat that. Al Snow is one of the greatest of all time and stuff. But if you're a wrestling fan, hearing that will make you laugh. And that's really what turned off a lot of people from the documentary. They're like, oh, what is this? These guys are calling, who is this guy? And why is he saying that Al Snow is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time? And you have to realize, like, this guy's one of Al Snow's students here. He works for Al, likes Al personally. I didn't see it as being a huge deal because everybody's all-time list looks different, I don't know how Al Snow got so far up your list, but it just is what it is. But Al Snow is a very heavily respected guy. I know he's, considered a joke because people who watch the Attitude Era, they looked at it from that perspective. But Al Snow gives you so much insight into wrestling. And as a closer, I want to talk about Al Snow, and his greatest insight is that he talked about how he wished he would have learned how to be an attraction. And he explains that when he came up with the head gimmick in ECW, he was brought up to WWE and he was put in a handicap match against Too Cool. And this was his opportunity to become an attraction, to be a star, to make things about him. And he made the mistake of listening to Terrible Creative, who gave him the idea of a Head and Shoulders bottle being put onto head and then pinned. It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid. And I remember that was from King of the Ring 98 or 99 or something like that. Or maybe King of the Ring 2000. And he said, like, essentially that killed his career. He was never going to be taken seriously again because the head gimmick was not only used against him, but he lost the match. And he's saying if he'd have been more selfish, protected himself more, and built himself up as an attraction, he wouldn't be in this position right now. He would have become a bigger star. And that was literally his only regret in the wrestling business, is that he didn't know then what he knows now. And you need somebody like that to run your wrestling promotion. Somebody who's made mistakes and can look back on it and say, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. Here's what I should have done. So when you're in that position, here's how you fix it. And I really thought that kind of insight that Al Snow brought to this show was very valuable for hardcore wrestling fans too. But I love this show. I thought it was good. Let me know what you guys think if you watched it. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.